You never really expect your life to split in two over a casserole. But that's exactly how it happened to me. It had been 7 days since we buried my husband, Harold. 45 years of marriage. 45 years of partnership, routines, bickering over thermostat settings, and watching evening reruns together. I swear I could still hear his slippers shuffling down the hallway when the house was quiet. I kept reaching for a cup to hand to him at breakfast, forgetting he wouldn't be there to take it. Grief does strange things to your brain. Time goes fuzzy and things feel louder, doors closing, clocks ticking, spoons clinking and empty mugs. I hadn't eaten much. Hadn't slept properly either. But when Eli, my son, my only child, called to say he and Nova wanted to have me over for dinner, I said yes. I thought maybe they just wanted to be near me. Maybe check in on their old mom. Maybe miss Harold together. Foolish me. I remember that night with surgical clarity, the kind that only comes when a moment slices you clean open. Nova met me at the door of their big craftsman-style home. All white walls and chrome fixtures. Too clean. It looked like a model house, the kind with fake fruit in a bowl. She gave me one of those air kisses that barely grazes your cheek. The kind women give each other when they're not sure if they're friends or rivals. "Come in, Ada," she said, flat as dry toast. "Dinner's ready." Eli was already at the table, scrolling on his phone. He didn't even look up until Nova cleared her throat. "Oh, hey, Mom." Not "Hi, how are you holding up?" Not "I've missed you." Just "Hey." They'd made lasagna, the frozen kind, but plated up fancy with a sprig of parsley like that made it gourmet. We sat around their glossy dining table, me, Nova with her perfect French manicure, and Eli in his polo shirt like he was headed to a golf lesson. Harold's absence sat between us like an elephant in mourning. I tried to make small talk. "Remember when your dad used to add red pepper flakes to the lasagna, and then complain it was too spicy?" I said, trying to laugh. Eli grunted. Nova didn't even smile. Then, as I was reaching for the bread basket, Nova folded her napkin, set it down just so, and looked me square in the eye. And she said it. "Now that Harold's gone, it's time you grieve, pack up and leave. This house was never really yours." Just like that. Casual. Like she was reminding me to take the trash out on Tuesdays. I blinked, trying to make sense of her words. I must have misheard. My brain scrambled to catch up. Surely Eli would speak up. He'd laugh and say, "Nova, come on." Or, "Mom, don't listen to her." But he didn't. He just nodded. Nodded. That nod hit me harder than any slap ever could have. He didn't even look sorry. Just resigned. Like he was watching someone read a script he'd already approved. I felt the room tilt. I looked at Eli and saw not my little boy with the gap-toothed grin, but a man I didn't recognize. A man who could let his grieving mother be spoken to like an unwanted house guest. Like deadweight. I didn't say a word. I couldn't. My tongue sat in my mouth like a stone. I stood steady as I could, thanked them for dinner, because manners don't die, even when your heart's breaking, and I walked out. I didn't cry on the drive home. I didn't yell or break anything. I just sat in Harold's old recliner, the one with the squeaky armrest, and stared at the fireplace we never used. That night I pulled out our wedding album. I traced the lines of our old smiles. I touched the corner of the picture where Eli had sat in my lap during his first birthday. So much love. So many years. And now I was disposable? Just some aging woman to be shuffled off once her husband was gone? I didn't sleep. I didn't eat. But the next morning I showered, ironed my best blouse, and combed my hair like I was about to attend a very important meeting. I looked in the mirror and saw someone I hadn't seen in a long time. Me. Not Harold's wife. Not Eli's mother. Just Ada. And Ada had had enough. Because if Nova and Eli thought they could bury me along with Harold, they were about to learn that I may be old, but I'm not dead. Not even close. They served lasagna that night. But I left with a taste for something else entirely. Revenge. Harold was the type of man who kept every receipt. I'm not kidding. I once found a faded slip from a hardware store dated 1983 tucked into the back of our tax folder, right next to a warranty for a toaster we hadn't owned since Clinton was president. He said it was for reference. I said it was borderline hoarding. He said tomato, I said get a shredder. Point is, Harold was meticulous when it came to money. I didn't question it. He handled the bills, the taxes, the insurance, all of it. Not because I couldn't, but because he actually liked doing it. Said it kept his mind sharp. Every Sunday morning he'd sit at the kitchen table with his calculator, his mug of strong coffee, and that same little satisfied grin he used to wear when he beat me at Yahtzee. After that dreadful dinner at Eli and Nova's, I decided to take a little walk into the credit union. I needed to know where I stood. Figured if they were ready to pack me up and ship me off like unwanted furniture, I might as well find out whether I could afford my own place, or a one-way ticket to somewhere sunny, with strong coffee and no adult children. I hadn't stepped foot inside the branch since Harold passed. The last time I'd been there was during a holiday toy drive. I dropped off 2 teddy bears and left before he could rope me into reviewing our emergency budget again. So when I walked in and asked to speak with someone about our accounts, the receptionist looked me up and down like I was lost. That's when I met Marina. Lovely woman. Just a smidge younger than me, with lavender glasses and fingernails painted like tiny sunsets. Turns out she paints watercolors in her free time. Mostly old barns and cats. We hit it off right away. She sat me down in her office, offered me a mint, and pulled up our accounts on her computer. She squinted, then looked at me over her glasses. "You actually have quite a few accounts, Mrs. Carter." I blinked. "A few." She started listing them. Joint checking, 2 savings accounts, a CD maturing next spring, a money market fund, and a trust. My name was on all of them. Some of them exclusively. I felt like I wandered into someone else's finances by mistake. "I don't remember setting these up," I admitted. Marina smiled kindly. "You're not alone. A lot of folks don't realize what they've signed over the years." And then it hit me. The random paperwork Harold had brought home, the ones I signed while he talked about termite insurance or refinancing. "It's just a routine update," he'd say, and I'd scribble my name without thinking twice. I trusted him. Completely. Turns out, I'd been signing the keys to my own kingdom. Harold had quietly created a financial safety net just for me. Tucked away accounts, slow drip savings, careful investments, all in my name. He never told me, but looking back, he didn't have to. That was Harold's way. Quiet, steady, and 3 steps ahead. The man couldn't cook to save his life, but he could balance a ledger in his sleep. I walked out of that bank with a thick folder full of statements, my head spinning like a ceiling fan on high. I wasn't broke. I wasn't helpless. I had resources. Options. Nova thought she could toss me out like an old cushion. Eli had nodded along like a fool. But Harold? My Harold had left behind more than memories. He left a plan. And oh honey, I was just getting started. For most of our marriage, Harold spent his days in the same place. His little workshop tucked behind the old feed store off Oak Hill Road. It was nothing fancy. A bit drafty in winter, smelled like wood shavings and coffee grounds, and had a radio that only played country from the 90s. But that place was Harold's kingdom. He ran a small custom furniture business for over 30 years. Just him, a few local boys, and a lot of sawdust. He used to joke that he could sand down an entire marriage's worth of arguments with a fresh belt sander and the right stain. I never asked too many questions about the business side. I knew he loved what he did, and as far as I was concerned, he kept food on the table and bees out of my bonnet. Years ago, Eli told me the shop had shut down. Said Harold sold it off because it wasn't making much and he was tired. At the time, I didn't question it. Harold had mentioned wanting to slow down. He started spending more time at home, sipping tea on the porch and reorganizing the spice rack like it was a chessboard. But after the bank visit, my gut started twitching. Something didn't add up. If Harold had planned ahead financially, maybe he'd done the same with the business. And I couldn't stop thinking about Sam. Sam was Harold's right-hand man. His apprentice, really. He started at the shop as a lanky teenager with messy hair and a stutter, and Harold took him under his wing. Taught him everything. Sam stuck around long after most young men his age moved on. I hadn't seen him since the funeral, where he cried harder than anyone not bound by blood, so I drove out to the workshop. From the outside it looked alive. The parking lot had trucks in it. The lights were on. There was music playing, still the same old station. I walked in and smelled cedar and varnish. And there was Sam, sanding down what looked like a headboard that could have been in a palace. When he saw me, he dropped the sander and came right over, wiping his hands on a towel that used to be a t-shirt. "Mrs. Carter," he said, beaming. "I've been meaning to call you. I wasn't sure if you'd want to talk business so soon." "Business?" We sat in Harold's old office. Same crooked chair, same tin of stale mints on the desk. Sam poured me a mug of coffee and pulled out a stack of folders. "Harold didn't sell the business," he said gently. "He restructured it 5 years ago. Put everything into a trust." I blinked. "A trust?" "Yup. Henderson Craftsman Trust. He made you the sole beneficiary. It's all here." He slid over documents all neat and proper. And there, plain as Sunday morning, was my name. I stared at it like it might disappear. The business hadn't just survived, it was doing well. Sam had kept it running with steady orders, a tight crew and loyal clients. All with Harold quietly overseeing from the sidelines. And then Sam handed me another folder. This one felt heavier. I opened it and saw ledgers. Notes. Payments. He loaned Eli quite a bit over the last few years, Sam said, lowering his voice. Almost $90,000. Every cent was written down. Amounts, dates, reasons, vague things like startup investment and bridge loan. Eli had borrowed from the business, my business, and hadn't paid back a dime. I didn't say anything for a while. Just sat there sipping lukewarm coffee, feeling like my entire world had tilted sideways again. But this time I wasn't falling. I was planting my feet. Harold had done it again. He'd given me something solid, something to stand on. I left with 2 folders, a head full of questions, and the first whisper of a plan. 3 days after I left Sam's workshop with a lap full of paperwork and a head full of steam, Eli and Nova showed up unannounced. No knock, no text, no polite heads up. Just the sound of my front door swinging open like they still had a key to my life. I was in the kitchen with Sam, going over some numbers while the kettle whistled. Sam had come by to walk me through the business contracts. Bless his heart, he brought fresh cinnamon rolls from that little bakery near the high school. The same one Harold used to swear had the only proper dough in the county. Eli strolled into my kitchen like he paid the mortgage. He didn't even look surprised to see Sam, which I found interesting. Nova was right behind him in heels too sharp for linoleum, clutching her phone like it was a badge of honor. "We'll need to sell the house and assess Dad's company assets," Eli said, pouring himself a cup of coffee from my pot. He didn't ask, just helped himself like he was visiting a break room at the office. Nova sniffed and started poking around the kitchen island like she was inspecting a model home. "We'll also need a list of what's going in the estate sale." "Estate sale?" I nearly choked on my tea. They were talking about my home like I was already halfway to the retirement condo brochures they probably had in the glove box. Sam stayed calm. Bless him, he looked up from the contracts and said, real polite like, "And who should I get account authorization from regarding Henderson Craftsman Trust?" Eli didn't hesitate. "Me, obviously. I'm handling Dad's affairs." I could have laughed. Truly. But I didn't. I let the silence settle for just a moment. The kind of silence that hangs like a heavy curtain right before the show starts. I set down my teacup, folded my napkin, because manners matter, even mid-showdowns, and said, "Actually, the company belongs to me." There it was. No drama, no yelling. Just 6 little words that rearranged the entire room. Eli froze. The color drained from his face so fast I thought he might faint onto the breakfast nook. Nova turned slowly, like someone had just tapped her with a cold fish, and gave me a look I imagine she saves for overcooked salmon. "What are you talking about?" she asked, blinking hard. Sam slid the paperwork over, cool as anything. "It's all here. The trust was established 5 years ago. Mrs. Carter is the sole beneficiary and current legal owner." Eli didn't say a word. He just looked at the folder like it had betrayed him personally. Nova opened her mouth and then shut it again. Her lips disappeared completely. They didn't stay long after that. No dramatic exit, no shouting. Just a stiff, awkward shuffle toward the door with promises that they'd circle back later. I nodded sweetly and offered them a cinnamon roll on the way out. They didn't take one. The moment the door clicked shut, I sat back down and looked at Sam. "Well," I said, patting the edge of the table, "I suppose that's what the young folks would call a plot twist." He chuckled and passed me another roll. That afternoon, I pulled out Harold's old yellow legal pad and started writing. Plans, lists, questions. I'd spent too long not knowing what I had. That was over. They thought I was just some grieving widow they could shuffle around. Turns out I was the one holding the ledger. A few days after Eli and Nova's little ambush visit, I found myself in Harold's study. That room had always been his domain: dark wood shelves, dusty trophies from community bowling leagues, and more filing cabinets than any one man reasonably needs. He called it the Situation Room, though the most exciting situation it ever saw was him misplacing his glasses for the 10th time. I hadn't been in there since the funeral. I don't know what pulled me in that morning, maybe a need to feel close to him, or maybe just curiosity. Whatever it was, I'm glad it happened. On the far wall was his big metal filing cabinet, the old gray one that weighed as much as a freezer. I'd dusted it for years without opening it, trusting that Harold's organizational system, which I never understood, was somehow holding up. I pulled open the bottom drawer and found a thick folder labeled, and I swear I'm not making this up, "In case the vultures circle." He'd written it in big block letters, underlined twice. I sat right down on that squeaky desk chair and opened it. Inside was everything. A detailed explanation of a home equity loan he'd taken out just over a year before he passed, in the amount of $320,000. The loan had been approved with no fuss. Harold had great credit and the house was long paid off. But instead of using the money for renovations or a new car or one of those snazzy RVs he kept threatening to buy, he transferred the entire sum into the Henderson Craftsman Trust. My trust. In plain terms, that meant he mortgaged the house to himself. The funds became part of the trust's assets, and I, being the sole beneficiary, essentially owned the mortgage. The bank held the lien, of course, but the funds were tucked away with all the business earnings, safe and tidy. It was brilliant, subtle, sneaky in the most loving way. And most importantly, it meant Eli and Nova couldn't just claim the house like it was leftover pie at a family picnic. If they wanted it, they'd have to take on the mortgage too. And good luck explaining that to a loan officer when you're already 80-some thousand in debt to the trust. I sat back and looked around the study. The leather chair, the stack of woodworking magazines, the antique clock that never kept proper time but Harold refused to get rid of. And I felt this mix of awe and affection. My husband, who couldn't fold a fitted sheet to save his life, had orchestrated a financial defense plan so slick it would have made a Wall Street lawyer whistle. He knew. Somehow he'd known. I tucked the folder under my arm, made a fresh pot of tea, and sat at the kitchen table with my notepad. The picture was clearer now. The house? Mortgaged but protected. The business? Mine. The money? Accounted for. And Nova, with her dreams of tearing out my wallpaper and installing an open-concept kitchen, had no idea what kind of tangled web she just walked into. I was no longer just holding the line. I was about to redraw the entire map. I didn't hear from Eli or Nova for about a week after the kitchen standoff. I figured they were stewing, which was fine. I had tea and cinnamon rolls, and the peace and quiet suited me just fine. Then came the envelope. Thick cream paper, very official looking. I opened it at the dining table with a butter knife, like I was unwrapping a particularly disappointing birthday card. Inside was a letter from a law office, some firm with a name like 3 golfing uncles, Harrison, Billings, and Dent. Turns out, Nova had decided to contest the trust. She claimed I was mentally compromised at the time of signing, that Harold had manipulated me, that I didn't understand what I'd agreed to. I nearly laughed out loud. I've balanced checkbooks with one hand while baking pies with the other. If anyone in this family is sharp, it's me. So I hired James Pendleton to be exact. A quiet, steely man with salt and pepper hair and a briefcase so worn at the corners it looked like it had seen a few legal wars. He didn't smile much, but he did nod approvingly when I handed him my folders labeled trust stuff, loan nonsense, and in case I get sued. He reviewed everything in silence, flipping pages like he was scanning for typos in the Constitution. Then he said, "Calm as you please. They don't have a leg to stand on, and they're about to owe you more than just an apology." That man was music to my ears. James began his digging. He went through every business record Sam had kept, every deposit, every handwritten loan note Harold had stashed away. He uncovered every missed payment Eli had made, every unfulfilled promise to repay the business for investments and projects that never existed outside of a hopeful Excel spreadsheet. The total? $96,000. That's how much they borrowed from the business over the years. Harold had written it all down: principal, interest, and payment schedules, none of which had been followed. James gathered it all, packaged it in a nice binder thicker than a church hymnal, and sent it to the other lawyer. And then we waited. Mediation day came and went with little fanfare. It was held in one of those sterile conference rooms with bottled water and polite tension. Nova showed up in a blazer 2 sizes too expensive. Eli looked like he hadn't shaved or slept. Their attorney tried to act confident, until James pulled out the documentation and laid it across the table like a royal flush. The silence in that room could have boiled tea. By the end of the meeting, their lawyer actually apologized to me. Apologized. Said they had not been fully briefed on the financial history involved. Nova looked like she'd bitten into a lemon. Eli couldn't even look me in the eye. The result? The trust stood. The business was confirmed mine. The house? Off limits without repaying the mortgage. And the $102,000? Very much a real debt. James packed his briefcase, adjusted his tie, and gave me the faintest, most satisfying nod I've ever seen in my life. I walked out feeling 10 feet tall. They came for war. I brought paperwork. The day I signed the paperwork for the beach cottage, I swear I heard Harold chuckle. He'd found it 3 years earlier, tucked away off a winding little road near the coast, not far from a sleepy town with more seagulls than people. He said it was our someday house, though at the time I rolled my eyes and told him I wasn't ready to be a full-time cardigan-wearing ocean widow just yet. But wouldn't you know it, he'd bought it anyway. When James helped me sort through the trust paperwork, there it was. Title clear, taxes paid, utilities connected, all managed through the business account. Harold had even left a note in the folder, written in his tiny, fussy handwriting. For Ada when she's ready for waves and peace. That man. The cottage wasn't big, but it didn't need to be. Whitewashed walls, old pine floors, a porch swing facing the water, and a clawfoot tub that made me feel downright elegant. The kitchen had those quirky blue cabinets Harold liked, and a window box full of herbs I started growing almost immediately. Basil, thyme, and something else I keep forgetting to label. I moved in 4 months after mediation. Didn't tell Eli or Nova. Just packed up what I wanted, gave away the rest, and let the house in town stay right where it was, with a mortgage and legal strings tied around it like a ribbon nobody asked for. 6 months later, Nova was back working retail, folding sweaters under those bright fluorescent lights she once claimed gave her migraines. Eli was driving for a rideshare service, quietly paying off his $102,000 debt, one court-ordered check at a time. I didn't gloat. I didn't throw it in their faces. I didn't even reply to their awkward holiday card that year. I just let them stew in their own decisions like overcooked carrots. No revenge needed, just reality doing its job. One morning, I was repotting my rosemary plant when the phone rang. I didn't recognize the number, but something in me said to answer. Hello, Mrs. Carter? This is Lena. I'm Marina's niece. She mentioned you helped her with some paperwork a while back? I remembered Lena. She worked at the hospital, if I recalled, and always wore cheerful earrings shaped like little birds or teacups. She explained she was starting a small support group for older women, especially those who'd been taken advantage of financially by their own families. Inheritance squabbles, pressure to sign things, children forgetting who raised them the minute they see dollar signs. I was wondering, she said gently, if you might speak at one of our meetings? First, I hesitated. I'm no public speaker. My idea of a crowd is 2 friends at brunch and the waitress eavesdropping. But then I thought about all the women like me, women who'd been made to feel like burdens, who'd been told to keep quiet, who loved their families so much they forgot to love themselves too. And I said yes. Not for revenge, not to stir the pot, but because silence can be heavy, and sometimes telling the truth sets you free in ways you never expected. Besides, Harold would have wanted me to. Last month I got a letter in the mail, not a bill, not a catalog, not even one of those phony prize envelopes. A real letter, handwritten, and the name on the return address stopped me in my tracks. It was from Eli. It was just 1 page, folded neatly. The handwriting was still the same, slanted, a little messy, but his. He'd written that he was sorry, that he finally understood what his father had done. That Harold hadn't just been organizing accounts or juggling numbers, he was quietly building a safety net for me, 1 thread at a time. Eli wrote that he was in therapy now, that he was working on himself, trying to be a better man, trying to understand how it had all gone so wrong. That Nova was reevaluating priorities, whatever that meant. I read it 3 times. Then I made a cup of tea and read it again. I do believe he meant it. I do. But it doesn't change the fact that the apology only came after the dust had settled and the court had made its ruling. It came after he lost what he thought he had a claim to. After I proved I wasn't the fragile old woman they assumed I was. It came from consequence, not conscience. And here's what I believe even more. If I hadn't stood my ground, if I hadn't dug through those papers, walked into that bank and asked the hard questions, I'd be living in a 1-bedroom rental near a strip mall, eating instant oatmeal and listening to Nova complain about fabric swatches in my old dining room. Instead, I get to watch the sun rise over the water every morning. I sit on my porch swing with my tea, and hear the gulls argue with each other like they're in a neighborhood dispute. I manage a business I never expected to inherit, but now take immense pride in. Sam still calls every Friday with updates, and I still pretend I understand the supply chain talk even when it goes over my head. Best of all, I spend time helping other women. Women who thought their worth disappeared when their husband did. Or who were told they should be grateful for crumbs because that's just how family is. I tell them it's not unkind to protect yourself. It's not betrayal to ask questions. And it's not weakness to walk away from people who treat you like a burden. Sometimes strength looks like bank statements, trust papers, and a really good lawyer. Sometimes it's just a quiet no said firmly in a kitchen you still own. The letter from Eli is tucked in a drawer. Not out of sight, but not on display either. I'm not mad. I'm not bitter. But I've also learned the hard way that forgiveness doesn't mean pretending nothing happened. It just means you stop letting it control the narrative. That evening, I sat on the porch with a blanket over my knees and watched the sky melt into gold. The ocean waves rolled in steady, like they always do. Like they don't care about inheritance or betrayal or mortgages. They just keep coming. And I thought, wherever Harold is, I hope he knows I figured it out. I hope he's proud. Because the woman he loved, she's doing just fine. Better than fine. She's free.
Share your thoughts in the comments. Has anyone ever tried to push you out of something that was rightfully yours? What did you do? If you liked the story, subscribe to the channel and give us a like.